Hello again. Uh, this time I'm going to talk to you about something quite important for all of us divers, I would say for all of us human beings. That is the way we survive and live, and the machine we use to do that. And that is our hearts and our lungs. We could say that our hearts are our engine and our lungs are the carburetor in the engine. We need both in order to burn our fuel, which is oxygen. Without that, and without sufficient supply, we simply cannot function. And so we need to know a bit more about what kind of energy, what amount of fuel, what efficiency of motor and carburetor we need in order to perform efficiently underwater. So enjoy the presentation. We're going to talk about our hearts, and we have to take good care about our heart and how to make it function at best. Especially if we're not as young as we used to be when we started diving, or else if we started diving when we were not as young as we used to be. This presentation regards any kind of diving, and what I'm showing is the most common kind of diving, but it is as efficient and as punctual for technical diving and any kind of diving, from breath-hold diving to recreational to extreme technical diving, because the motor and the pump that keeps us functioning is exactly the same and requires the same attention. Leonardo da Vinci once designed and drew this sort of ideal man, the Vitruvian man, which shows the ideal proportions that a human body should have and also imply the ideal underlying mechanisms that would allow this human body to perform efficiently. We cannot pretend to be that efficient. We have to cope with our differences, with our aging, with our diseases, illnesses, and differences in ability to perform and to respond to stress. We do that by burning fuel and producing energy. And any action we do has a cost in energy. We measure this with a unit which is called MET, which stands for metabolism. And 1 MET is the equivalent of a certain amount of fuel we consume per kilogram of our body weight per minute. And that is 3.5 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram per minute. So if you weigh, for example, 70 kilos, you would, any minute, burn 3.5 times 70 milliliters of oxygen. And you need to actually pump this fuel to your body and to your tissues. And how do you pump it to the tissues? Very simply, through breathing and circulation. That is, through your respiratory and cardiac and cardiocirculatory function. Energy cost varies with the amount of energy that you have to produce. So, as you can see in this slide, sleeping, which is close to our so-called basic metabolism, consumes or burns just a little less than 1 MET, 0.9. If you stand up and cook, for example, you consume about twice as much of your basic metabolic rate. If you walk easy, you burn 3 times as much. If you run fast, you may end up in consuming even 12 times as much as your basic metabolic rate. So we have to consider these things when we face diving and we consider how much energy we need in diving. If you're interested in little more, you may look on the internet and find this very interesting paper, which will tell you more about the aerobic demand, that is, the amount of aerobic energy, that is, oxygen consuming energy, you need to have when diving. Diving is a very variable activity. It can be very easy, or it can be extremely demanding. But even if you are diving easy, such as the lady that is diving in the upper left corner of the slide, you will anyway be requested to produce 3 times as much as your basic metabolic rate. Normal diving can demand up to 7 times as much of the metabolic rate. Emergency may require 10 times as much, that is 10 METs. And if you swim fast, such as keeping a speed of 1.3 knots, that is 1.3 nautical miles per hour, you may be required to be able to produce as much as 13 METs, that is 13 times your basic metabolic rate. To give you an example, this is the requirement to be admitted to a Navy SEAL course. If we want to say what is the average energy cost of scuba diving, we could say that it can require between 3 and 10 METs. So in order to perform efficiently, a diver should be able to produce energy from 3 times to 10 times as much as his or her basic metabolic rate, which is not little, because in order to do so, you may be in need to burn up to 35 milliliters per minute per kilogram of oxygen, which is very close to athletic performance. If we are talking about free diving, one may consider that free diving is less energy consuming than scuba diving. Well, it's not actually so. Even snorkeling may be more energy demanding than easy diving. As you can see, snorkeling is deemed to require up to 5 METs. Easy breath-hold diving needs something like 7 METs. Quick, or let's say not extreme, but advanced breath-hold diving is thought to require as much as 12.5 METs, and fast, extreme, or very, very deep breath-hold diving can require as much as 16 METs, which is way more than a Navy SEAL would be requested to produce in terms of energy, which means that we divers are actually exposed to a demand of energy production, which is definitely pretty high. This is also connected to the speed of swimming that we are requested to maintain. And of course, speed of swimming is something that is also linked to any situation of need, not to speak about swimming against current. In this graph, you will see in the upper blue line the energy or oxygen consumption which is required if you swim at 0.5 meters per second, which means 28 meters per minute, which means swimming an average pool length in 1 minute. You see that the energy consumption and the oxygen that you need to consume to swim that speed and that length in that time is quite high. Whereas if you swim at 12 meters per minute, which means swimming a swimming pool, an average length swimming pool in 3 minutes, which is nothing really demanding, your energy consumption and oxygen consumption will be limited to 0.6 or 0.5 milliliters per minute per kilogram. So this slide shows you that the more energy you require, the more oxygen you are required to burn. The more energy you're required to produce, the more oxygen you're required to burn. This is another slide that shows you a slightly different view on the same concept. And if you see, the slope increases with your BMI. What is your BMI? Your body mass index. That is, the heavier you are in comparison to your height, the more you consume. There are two ways of having a large BMI. One is being very sinewy and muscular, and the other one is being fat. In both cases, you burn more oxygen. But obviously, if you are very fit, very muscular, in good shape, you trained to do that, and your ability to burn oxygen is enhanced. Whereas if you are a sedentary person, if you are overweight, if you have too much fat and your BMI is essentially made of fat mass and not of lean mass, the situation is a bit different because you are not definitely trained to burn that amount of oxygen and to produce that amount of energy. And this obviously implies some undesired negative effects on your performance, simply because you're not trained enough, and so you will be exhausted very soon, and in certain conditions, such as underwater, in emergency condition, rough waters or so on, you could even end up being incapacitated. Because this is our evolution, if we want to express it with a bit of humor. Of course, yes, when we were apes, probably we had not that much fat mass, although we probably had a little less brain mass. Now, what did we get together with our higher brain mass? Probably a bit too much of fat mass as well. So this is unfortunately what we are facing when thinking about at least a portion of the modern diver community and population. Actually, if you look at this image, how many people you see going up and down the staircase, and how many people you see on the escalator. And this shows you what we prefer doing. I mean, we avoid exercise as much as possible. And if we avoid exercise as much as possible, we are not trained to exercise when we are in need of it. Because this could be the modern version of the Vitruvian Man of Leonardo da Vinci, and we have to cope with that, unfortunately. So let's try to understand a little better what physical problems a modern diver like that could have. Let's list them. This modern diver could be limited in his or her exercise tolerance because of poor cardiovascular fitness, because of not enough acclimatation to counteract or resist thermal stress, and above all, since we developed our brains quite a lot. Also, because of failure to recognize symptoms or to simply deny them because it will never happen to me. And this is a common attitude of men and women and divers. The classification by weight in diving population, according to a recent United States epidemiology report, is, as you can see in this slide. There is quite a surprising amount of overweight and obese individuals when we consider the right and slight gray column, which is the fatality column. As you can see, both injuries, diving injuries and fatalities, have a significant correlation with being overweight or obese, as opposed to what you see in underweight or normal weight population, which means that having a wrong BMI, and when I say wrong BMI, I mean a body mass index which is linked to fat mass and not to lean mass, is definitely unfavorable when considering the safety of diving and the rate and the occurrence and the probability of injuries or for heaven's sake, no, fatalities. This is confirmed by this other slide, where fatality rate is related to body mass index, but you can see exactly the same figures, whereby overweight, obese, and morbidly obese individuals are definitely more involved in fatal accidents in diving than healthy individuals. Unfortunately, the average age of the diving community is not decreasing. We are a relatively old community, where the average age of males is in the surrounding of 46 years and the average age of females is in the surrounding of 43 years. Being that age, we are subject, unfortunately, to the normal disease conditions that are typical of aging humans. And we have to take that into consideration when we think about diving, because diving exposes us to an unfriendly environment, an environment which is definitely not compatible with human life unless humans take certain measures and adopt certain preventative behaviors and measures, so to be in the condition to respond adequately to the challenges that this extraordinary environment imposes on us. Now, the following slides will show you something that apparently is unrelated, but eventually it is. Why do I speak about hydrophobicity and show you this funny slide? Isn't it ironic that we speak about hydrophobicity about divers who actually look for water, want water, wish water, desire water, would like to live in water, would like to breathe water? So why should we call them hydrophobic? Why should we speak about hydrophobicity? Well, actually, hydrophobicity is something that has to do with bubbles. Now look at this. This is something that was given to me by a colleague, a very highly esteemed colleague, Ran Ariely from the Israeli Diving Medicine Institute. And this is a film, actually a wafer, hydrophobic, which means that it repels water. This wafer has been exposed to pressure and then decompressed. Exposed to pressure with, of course, in contact with air and water. And when decompressed, this wafer developed on its surface a lot of bubbles, as you can see. This is a hydrophobic wafer. And it produced those many bubbles. As you can see, very clear, very round, and detaching from the surface of the wafer. In this other slide, you see a center wafer, the black one in the center without all the bright spots, which is a hydrophilic wafer. And this one, exposed to the same pressure differential, did not produce any bubble. Why is this important? Because we are actually exposed to produce hydrophobic spots in our arteries, capillaries, blood vessels. Actually on the endothelium, which is the inner layer of our blood vessels. These hydrophobic spots can facilitate the formation of gas nuclei, gas bubbles, when exposed to pressure differential. These hydrophobic spots increase with age. You may call it atherosclerosis if you want. And these hydrophobic spots are actually bubble nests. And when the bubble is produced, the bubble is treated and interpreted by the body as a foreign invader, and therefore it is attacked by the defense forces, which are the platelets, the white blood cells, and these cells, these defense forces, activate a number of other defenses and trigger the release of a lot of defense ammunition from the body towards the offending foreigner, so to speak. Unfortunately, these instruments are thought as instruments to defend the body against microbes, for example, viruses or so on. But they don't do much against an inner gas bubble. On the contrary, they can do damage on the surrounding tissue. So it's some sort of friendly fire that we trigger when we produce many bubbles. And this is also one of the reasons why we are very careful about what happens to aging divers, because we had this unfortunate occurrence when growing older, which is the very likely production of more and more hydrophobic spots in our circulatory system. In fact, out of the epidemiologic study of over 40,000 dives that we produced 3 years ago, we could see that there is a significant correlation between bubble production at equal exposure and age, and there is also a significant correlation between bubble production and fat mass, to go back to when I was speaking of BMI, but the fat mass BMI and not the lean mass BMI. So being old and being overweight is definitely not favorable in terms of protection from bubble production. The same correlation applies not only when considering the number of bubbles seen and the BMI and the fat mass in healthy diving, in the healthy diving population, but also when we compare the injured diving population, that is those who suffered decompression illness. And even in that population, the age and the fat mass have a higher incidence with respect to younger ages and leaner divers. This is paralleled in normal general medicine by the increase of cardiovascular diseases, CVD, with age. So as you can see, there is nothing strange. I mean, if we consider that decompression illness is a disease produced by bubbles, if the bubbles have an impact on the cardiovascular system, and at the end of the day are considerable as an inflammatory and tisular disease, it's no surprise that there is a parallelism between age, DCS, and cardiovascular diseases. They are based on very similar platforms. In actual fact, if we consider, it's not nice to speak about that, but if we consider how and when and how many divers die, we will see that 50% of fatalities are in the 40 to 60 age group, and a very large proportion of these divers had some cardiac involvement and or symptoms related to a cardiac problem before the dive. And many of them were unexperienced, so they were not ready enough to face the extraordinary environment. Actually, 88% of these divers died on the first dive of their series. So we here have a take-home message. You have to be more careful if you're in that age range, and you have to take care of your fitness and especially of your experience, because experience may be life-saving together with a good level of fitness. Obviously, it's not only the heart that matters, although it matters a lot. We have to be careful when considering the safety of diving about the healthy conditions of all the organs that are subject to pressure changes. Essentially, we are speaking about the air spaces in our body, gas-filled, air-filled spaces, that is, the sinuses, the ear, the lungs, and so on. We have to be very careful about any condition that may compromise survival, alertness, ability to perform, agility, such as, for example, epilepsy, such as diabetes, such as inability to properly coordinate movements, inability to properly and efficiently swim, or simply excessive obesity and body weight that would not allow you to perform efficiently in case of emergencies. Obviously, this regards the two ends of these slides, right and left, which is on one end, keeping fit, on the other end, keeping healthy. so to avoid either excessive lack of fitness or intolerable or non-diving compatible medical conditions. And look at what keeping fit can do, can benefit actually. These three curves show you what difference can make being active as opposed to being sedentary. Look at the dotted line above and the I don't know, it's also dotted, but it's larger dots or longer dots, I don't know, line below. Being fit and exercising can actually produce a lot more ability to consume oxygen and to be independent, physically independent, and actually you can fight the decrease in your ability to burn oxygen with age by exercising, and you can rejuvenate by almost 10 years by simply keeping fit. So you can be 60, but a fit 60 can be performing as a 50-year-old. And this is the good effect of being active and fit as opposed to be sedentary. And this may mean, I'm sorry to be so blunt, but this may mean life or death when diving. This is a very interesting study that was done on US military, and it shows you the survival rate in years of people when compared to their exercise ability and energy production ability. As you can see, those who were able to produce energy equivalent to 8 METs lived longer, survived better than those who were less fit and were able to produce less METs than the former group. And mind you, remember that in the very first slides I was saying that the average energy consumption required by diving is between 3 and 10 METs. So if you keep at the higher level and are able to produce and burn the equivalent of 10 METs energy, you will place yourself at the upper end of this curve, and so you will not only be better divers and safe divers, but you will also be safer in your life and assure a healthier life for yourself and a longer life probably for yourself and your family. So to summarize, look at this slide, memorize it, try to remember what level of energy is required for the different kinds of diving that are listed here, and therefore what is your fitness level, your ideal fitness level to maintain, to be safe, aware and healthy divers. You will need to be in that middle range. So you will need to be either moderately or optimally active, and you will need to be able to produce from 10 to 14 METs energy equivalent. When coming to what we don't want to speak about, but we have to, that is, what are the most common recurrent factors in fatal accidents in diving, this slide is self-explanatory. Look at the three first factors, first columns on the left. Drowning. Well, drowning is clear. Drowning needs no explanation. We are in the water. That is the end result. If we lose control, if we lose consciousness, in the end, we drown. But look at the other two columns. What are the triggers for the eventual drowning? And you will see that the factors that have the most impact are cardiac and age-related factors. And this only confirms what I have been showing till now. These cardiac incidents, by 60%, were preceded by symptoms such as difficulty in breathing, fatigue, distress, chest pain, or divers feeling ill. And actually, in 56% of these 156 cardiac incidents that led to diving-related fatalities, the autopsy report provided evidence of cardiovascular disease, even if not a myocardial infarction. And this should tell you something, that those hearts were too good to die. Those hearts were not prone to myocardial infarction. Those hearts were simply exposed to a stress that they were not trained to cope with. They were brought to run too fast for what they were trained to do. And this means that a large proportion of these fatalities could have been prevented by a wiser approach and a more aware approach by the divers themselves. This curve doesn't tell you other than what I have shown so far, that the fatality rates increases with the age of the divers. No surprise anymore. So, in conclusion, we have to say that fatalities are not so common in diving, fortunately. The most common causes are gas supply problems, and that's no surprise. Emergency ascent, and that's no surprise as well. But the third common cause is cardiac health issues, followed by other things that one may think are more frequent underwater, such as being entrapped or entangled or not being able to keep the buoyancy. That is that our goal for the future is to focus on cardiac health and fitness, and diving fitness matters. So to improve them as much as possible and to provide divers with the best advice possible in order to prevent and to educate the divers to prevent these causes of death. What are the modifiers that any diver could apply? Well, the first one is to undergo regular checkups and regular medical examinations to keep a good physical condition, to assure that his or her cardiovascular system and cardiopulmonary system is in good shape, to be mentally alert, which means also to avoid denial, because denial is one of the main dangers of diving, and to gain enough experience. We have seen that the most fatalities occurred in unexperienced divers on their very first dives. And considering the hydrophobicity, the bubbles, and all the other things that I showed you before, obviously adopting more conservative profiles which will reduce as much as possible the production or the likability of production of bubbles on ascent. What are we doing to help the diving community to better understand and to better prevent all these things? Well, actually, if we said that one of the main issues is to undergo medical checks and to be aware of one's medical conditions, the ideal setting could be that a diver is always informed about his or her cardiovascular and, let's say, general performance. And you can do that by simply monitoring the vital functions and the performance functions of the body. And what are these? Essentially, cardiac frequency, respiratory rate, and other parameters. This can be done by telemedicine, and this is one of the most demanding and challenging research projects that Dan is involved in now, through a project that we call Avatar. In another presentation we will explain better what Avatar is, but essentially it's a very modern and advanced telemedicine and telemonitoring system that will allow the diver to both receive information about his or her own performance directly in real time underwater, and also be connected wirelessly through a central database, something which is now allowed to us by the modern use of the modern technology. As you can see, we are developing systems that will allow the diver to transmit data wirelessly through a receiving transducers on the surface, which will transmit data to a receiving alarm center or mission control on Earth, obviously on land, and will be able to also feed back the diver with real-time information about his or her own performance or problems, and at the same time trace the diver, geolocalize the diver, so that in case of emergency, the alarm center would exactly know where the diver is and what is happening to it, to the diver. This is done through with the use of intelligent wearables that will be integrated in the in the diver's equipment, wetsuit, dry suit, regulators, tanks, whatever. And this is a short video which shows you what the real thing is, because we are not thinking of science fiction or dreams or visions, but we are thinking of prototypes that are already working and have been working underwater, have allowed us to receive cardiorespiratory signals from divers as far as in diving 30 meters underwater in the Maldives, with signals received in Central Europe. What you are seeing here is just the prototypes, but these will be soon developed into something wearable of a size slightly bigger than a dive computer that the diver will be able to actually take with him or her on every dive. We are very proud of this, and stay tuned, because you will soon hear something more about that. This is an example of an electrocardiogram that I received on my PC, on my computer, and on my mobile phone from a diver diving 30 meters underwater in the Maldives, and I was in Europe. And this is the ideal setting of our future coming, actually, it has already come. It's already working, although it's a prototype. Telemedicine system that will allow divers to be not only located but also monitored fully for their performance and health while diving anywhere in the world. And this is also already partly integrated in the Dan app, because the Dan app already allows you to communicate your position by sending an emergency message to the emergency alarm center that will allow you not only to say and write what your needs are, but also to transmit your geolocation with exact coordinates. And very soon, even the telemedicine data will be integrated in this app, so you will be able, by using the Dan app, to be fully connected and if you wish, also real-time and continuously connected with the alarm center to be fully monitored. This way you will be, on one hand, safer, and on the other hand, you will contribute to our continuous collection of diving physiology data and to the enrichment of our diving database, which will, in the end, produce more knowledge and more safety for the diving population. Thank you for your attention.